Yeah,
I,
right.
yeah.
And
So,
very few people adhere to it, right?
oh
We
yes,
give it a
for sure.
fancy name, you fill out the chart, you got all of the numbers filled in, like this is a 27% chance of failure,
Mm.
and then this thing gets set aside. And having the discipline to go back to this thing and be go through that list and say, we have to address this risk or it could really hurt us. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
all so
hard.
true. So let's talk a little bit about your role as looking at and building teams. So how does your background in chemistry and manufacturing influence your current leadership roles? And then what is it that you look for in the team?
Well, I will say that my background in chemistry and engineering did very little to help me in my team building skills. Like I started a business kind of because I was unemployable, as the nerd that I was to some extent. I was kind of keep this guy away from regular people. That's not really, that doesn't lend itself well to team building, but that's one of the first things you have to do when you start a company is figure out who's going to be on your little bus, and what are they going to do with their time, and how do you keep them motivated. um, one of the things that I think we've done exceptionally well, I've made every hiring mistake you can imagine in the last 30 years, just not really understanding either the needs that we were trying to fill or the talents of the people we're trying to attract. But one thing we've done really well, I think, is identify those key individuals, especially on the technology side, bringing on people like me, nerds like me, that uh, looked at the world differently
Mhm.
and might even be, not necessarily seen as a big asset in a company, but I see those types of people as people that we need to elevate. Elevate the technologists. These people are the ones that are really making things happen. As a nerd, having an appreciation for the innovation process, how hard it is, you have to have somebody that's obsessed with innovation. And these people are not what you would call your most socially adept types, as I alluded to earlier, right? These people often don't get along with the rest of us normal people, quote unquote, but they're the ones that are actually doing the innovating and elevating those people and making them a central part of the innovation process. A lot of times we treat them like mushrooms, as they say. We're going to tell you what to do. We'll give you the instructions and keep you away from the customer, because heaven forbid you have a discussion with the person that's asking us to invent something for them. um, you know, it was always my opinion that you get the innovator on the phone with the customer as soon as possible and let them ask the hard questions.
Mhm.
So in terms of team building, understanding people's individual motivations, because we talked about the nerds, but then you have people that are selling the product and the folks that are keeping track of the money and the people that have to make the product, and getting those people in a room and getting them to disagree without being disagreeable, have healthy conflict. That's hard to do. Some people are good at conflict. Most people aren't very good at
Mhm.
conflict. They argue poorly. They argue like it's personal. They don't use sound reasoning. They want to just bully people into their way of thinking. And figuring out those folks before you give them too much power, like people like that can't really succeed in an executive team. And it's really hard to teach somebody to set their ego aside in a tough discussion. So these are the kinds of things I think about when I think about creating a leadership team. Is I have four things that are must-haves for me with people. I say it over and over again: humility, curiosity, courage, and kindness.
Mhm.
right? You have to have all of those. Um, and if you miss one of them, you cannot be on our team. I won't work with somebody who doesn't have some self awareness, who is curious enough to ask questions about from the other person, seek first to understand and then to be understood. And you don't, and no jerks, right? You can't have people on your team that are just jerks. And courage means that you stand up and you identify when you got a jerk on the team, or you are courageous enough to admit when you're wrong, when the thing that you've been advocating turns out to be exactly the opposite of what we should have been doing, and say, "Hey, I messed up. I'm going to take accountability without somebody having to point it out for you." So that's, I guess, that's broad strokes, in 5 minutes or less, how I've thought about teens for the last 30 years.
I think you've hit a lot of really good points. I mean, in your initial opening, I mean, when you said, your understanding of how to build a team, wasn't really there. The first thing that came to mind for me was, given your football experience, and I've used this analogy before, that, and I'm not a huge sports fan. And I mean, I sort of tell people like, look, I don't understand everything that happens in football. I certainly understand, when people are scoring goals and things like that, but I don't understand, kind of the technicalities. But whenever I look at a football field, I can see kind of a corporate organization. I could see, the salespeople in the organization. I could see the marketers. I could see the people that, essentially are all on the offensive side. And then you also sort of see the scientists and the developers and the people that are creating kind of the base technology on the defensive side of, the organization, and just, more or less building that aspect of the company as well. But I also think that you've hit on some really, key points as well, because one of the things that I've seen, a larger shift in many organizations, and one of the organizations that I work with today is definitely one of these where they really have figured out how to make sure that the bullies and the people that are like corporate antagonists overall, really aren't a part of their organization. They found a way to sort of say, look, if that is your trait, go somewhere else, please, because we don't want you. And I've been in organizations. I mean, my time at GE, I certainly ran into several people that they were promoted entirely because of the fact that they were corporate bullies, and they would gladly call you to a meeting with 30 people, and in front of 30 people essentially call up somebody that they didn't particularly like, and then have that person sort of, be undressed, is what the way I sort of liken it, in front of
Wow.
everybody. So the minute that I moved into consulting, the one thing I went to my attorney and said, look, if this happens, I want the ability to walk out, and I want the ability for the company that I'm working with to be zero to come after me for anything other than paying my final bill for the day and me moving on, because I don't want to work with them. And it was
Right.
funny, the first couple times that I ran into it, people were a little shocked that, "Hey, look, he's done for the day, and by the way, he's not coming back because our CEO had his, 4th or 5th blow up of the day, and this one happened to be in the room with the consultant, and by the way, he's not working with them." And so I was,
Right.
more than happy to pack up my stuff and leave, and the CEO again tried to, use his common tactics of, "Hey, you can't do this." "Oh, I can, and it's in my contract."
But can I? As a matter of fact, I can.
I
Yes.
can. Yeah, but yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I think it's an important thing, like, having a little self-awareness, having
Yeah.
a lot of empathy, kindness, and approaching, the world with a lot of curiosity, I think could carry us a lot further. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
And in the meantime, you have to gird yourself a little bit and get a stiff spine and say, I'm going to do something that's uncomfortable today.
Mm.
I'm going to go into my boss and have an uncomfortable conversation and say, you can't treat me like that. As one example, you have to be courageous.